My name is Charles Walton, and most people call me Charlie. Last name is Walton, Walton, and I'm the president and owner of Smithers-Oasis Company, headquartered in Kent, Ohio.
So, Charlie, we'll start with maybe you telling us a bit about your own personal history. How did you become interested in horticulture?
I think, we're influenced by our family. My mother grew up with a love of plants and flowers, and I think that I probably inherited a certain amount of that from her. But horticulture, rather than agriculture, I was originally going to be an agriculturalist, and I was living in Brazil, and I was going to go back and ranch. And one day I woke up and realized that I wasn't going to marry a rich Brazilian lady, and that this was really a dream. I was changing schools from Clemson in South Carolina to Cal Poly out in California, San Luis Obispo, and looked at all the urban agriculture going on, all the planting on the freeways, and realized that there was a tremendous amount of money and effort being spent in urban beautification. And it was at that point that I changed, and I went into ornamental horticulture at Cal Poly, and have been excited about the subject ever since. I was going to college during the Vietnam period, so Uncle Sam had some plans for me right after college. I took an ROTC program, so I was a commissioned officer back then in '69, and I ended up by going to Panama rather than going to Vietnam, and I had an engineer company there. Came out and worked for a very short period of time in Washington, D.C. for a land planning firm. Realized the error of my ways of commuting from Annapolis, Maryland into Washington, D.C. and made a call. I was interviewed by one of Davey Tree's competitors, Bartlett Tree Company, and they showed some interest in me, and I thought, well, if Bartlett would be moderately interested, maybe Davey would be interested. And I called and ended up by being hired by Davey Tree.
And what did you do for Davey Tree?
It was an interesting job. I was a staff horticulturalist, and at that time we had a technical service center located in Kent, Ohio. And there was an entomologist on staff, and there was a weed specialist on staff. And then there was a horticulturalist, and they had lost their horticulturalist. So I came in and took his position. Today, his position is held by Roger Funk, who you met as we came in here today. The challenge was to take basic horticultural practices and to see how they would apply to field sales and to turn them into internal practices for Davey Tree. And as well as a teaching portion during the winter, we would bring in the tree care foreman from around the country, and I would teach a horticultural module. Someone else would teach entomology. Someone else would teach pathology and things like that.
Did you stay in Kent, or were you moved someplace else?
Well, I was initially started off in Kent, and then I ended up by being transferred to New York. Davey bought a large garden center complex, about 40-acre nursery, with a retail garden center, and we had a retail center with a retail florist shop in it. And if I knew then where I was going to end up, eventually I would have paid a lot more attention to that flower shop. So I ran that for about 3 years, and I had no experience with retail at all. Went to New York thinking that this was going to be a lark because I knew the products and I knew the technical side of this, but I'd never done retail. I was not a merchant, and I jokingly say that part of New York eats Ohioans for lunch, and it was a tough, brutal couple of years, but one of those experiences you say you'd never do it again, but you'd never trade anything for it. And it was really that experience that really led me back to Smithers-Oasis Company, because Ted Smithers was going into, he was the owner of Smithers-Oasis, the people that make the green floral foam, invented that category. They were going into the plant care business, and they were going to package a line of consumer plant care products that would be sold through grocery. And this was back in the mid-'70s when you and everyone else would go shopping for milk and come home with a grocery cart full of green plants. And this was the green plant revolution that was sweeping our industry. And Ted wanted to package professional plant care products, but for the consumer. And at that time, that's a very simple idea now because we have them, but at that time there were no such products. And we ended up in a very big way going into that business, ran into the marketplace and met Gillette and Alberto Culver and several others all at the same time in the marketplace. So it was quite an experience for us, but so I had been hired by Davey or by Smithers-Oasis because of my retail background with Davey. So Smithers-Oasis is celebrating its 50-year anniversary this coming year, and started off as by Vernon Smithers in Akron, Ohio, who had a company called Smithers Scientific, and they were an experimental testing laboratory for the big rubber companies that were all in Akron at the time. He always wanted to manufacture something and ended up by developing a water-absorbent foam, which he envisioned being used as a substrate to hold flowers upright in the arrangement. Prior to this, flowers were arranged in vases, with basically an upright vase shape to the arrangement. Chicken wire, cedar greens, newspaper, sand, Kensons, little metal pin holders, frogs, if you will, were what was being used by the commercial florist. Mr. Smithers invented this foam chemistry, and that's a whole other story in itself, and introduced it to the floral trade. And it's a plastic material, it's phenolic foam, same material that the black pot handles on the kitchen stove are made out of, same material that light switches are made out of, except this is foamed rather than compression molded. And it's foamed, and by doing so, a bubble is created and holes are engineered in that bubble, which allow the water to flow in and then migrate from bubble or cell to cell and eventually up the vascular system of the cut flower. And we modify the chemistry of this to be flower friendly. We create a good environment so bacterium don't grow very well, and that's why flowers last longer in Oasis Floral Foam. So the company was started 50 years ago, got its start right here in Ohio, then branched out to California to get over the Rocky Mountains because of freight. And then Vernon, in his wisdom, put up a little plant right across the line in Toronto. And it was not because he wanted to be an international manufacturer. It was to dodge the 15% duty between the United States and Canada. But that one act allowed the company to basically learn how to branch and to be able to operate out of remote facilities. The next facility was in Denmark, and he had a retail florist in Ingsholt, who was a florist in Copenhagen, picked up a brick of foam at an FTD convention, came to him and said, I think that this will do well in Europe. So they set up a little test market where via parcel post, some foam was sent over to Denmark, and Ib delivered them to his florist friends on a bicycle in downtown Copenhagen. The next year, Vernon and one of the boys went to Denmark. They bought a farm outside of Copenhagen and put up a prototype molds to start making floral foam in Europe. What you can tell is that Vernon Smithers was not a very good strategist in terms of where to go. I mean, he picked the end of the earth in Scandinavia with a population of less than 5 million people in order to start this. But he built around the strengths of people, and he liked Ib Ingsholt. Ingsholt was interested and turned out to be an excellent entrepreneur. And while the rest of the business was being built in North America and elsewhere, Ib expanded this business all throughout Europe. And this was before the common market. So if you were going to sell in France, you had to have a French company. And if you were going to sell in Belgium and Holland, you had to have a Dutch or a lowland company, or same with Spain and the rest. So over the years, we now have, I think, 7 operating units in Europe. And the most recent one was a plant just commissioned in the Czech Republic, old Yugoslavia. So we have a very, very broad base of employees in Europe. And at the same time, over my watch, I've been with the company for 27 years now. Expanded operations in the Far East, in Japan, Korea, China, Malaysia, most recently into India, South Australia. I think that's it in that part of the world. So we have 22 operating companies around the world that manufacture Oasis floral foam and Oasis floral products. And it's really exciting. We are like the United Nations when we get together, except we have a more common agenda than the United Nations have, and I think we're perhaps more functional than they are. We're also throughout South America with a good-sized facility in Mexico, and they take care of the territory all the way to Panama. We have a licensee in Colombia to handle the northern crown of South America, and then we have a wholly owned company in Sao Paulo, Brazil, to handle the southern cone of South America. So with all of that, we have pretty good coverage around the world. You ask how Smithers-Oasis fits into horticulture. Horticulture is a very broad industry, and it's made up of many different segments. There's a nursery production and all the allied trades with nursery, so we are not directly involved with that. We are very involved on the floristry side of things, and one branch of floristry would be the greenhouse floral production of pot flowering crops such as chrysanthemums and poinsettias and geraniums and bedding plants and the likes. Many years ago, Vernon Smithers said, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could take this wonderful green foam and grow plants in it? And Ted Smithers, when I came on board, handed me that dream and said, while you're doing these other things, how about working on this a little bit? Well, there was no more hostile piece of chemistry on the planet than this. This is phenol and formaldehyde and acids and other things. So we worked and we worked and we worked. And we now have a product that outperforms peat moss in terms of being a substrate for the greenhouse horticulture for propagation, and which we're quite proud of. And we have a product that allows these very large controlled environment factories, and that's really what a greenhouse really is. It has much more to do with material handling and conversion of plants to blooming product, and resembles much more of a factory than not. So one of their needs was to have a sterile substrate that could be treated uniformly across an acre or 2 acres of greenhouse and watered automatically, and that this cube would hold just as much water as this one. And we provide that to the greenhouse industry, as well as we have a non-spillable soil mix, if you will. And Paul Leckie came to us one day and said, I ship my little cuttings. I start these superior products in strips, and I ship them. But by the time the UPS people get finished with them, they turn them upside down. The soil mix falls out, and it's a mess. How about a solid material that will grow that the UPS people can't mess up, or the U.S. Post Office can't mess up? So that was really part of the genesis for developing a synthetic substrate for the rooting of plants. Today, we have now been in this business, been working at it during my entire time, so probably more than 25 years. And we ship cuttings. We help the growers, specialized growers, ship rooted plantlets, small ones, all over the world. And our material is, without a doubt, the finest shipping material in the world. And we have a new, exciting one coming out that one of the real challenges was to talk to a grower and convince him that he can grow in a piece of cellular plastic as well as he can grow in peat moss. Now, you haven't lived until you have that argument. But we have found a way now to take peat moss plus coir, which is the tree fern fiber, and we've invented a hydrophilic polymer, a polymer that absorbs water as a glue, and we mix that plus this dry material together in a very specially designed mixer. And we then drop this in dry into the cavity trays that a grower will grow in, catalyze it, and voila, it becomes a plug of, which is all organic, but hung together with a polymer of inorganic, and it looks just like peat moss, but it has a structural integrity of a plug. And we can regulate the air, so we have more air at the bottom than we do at the top, and it facilitates automatic transplanting. And we are just so excited. We worked for 3 years to develop the system and all the engineering to go along with it. So we're quite excited about this. And the significance is that this will take us into some crops which we historically have not been involved with. So we'll be in woody ornamentals, we'll be in the nursery business, we'll be doing all of that. So stay tuned. We're really going to have a good time with this.
Vernon Smithers' story, how he invented the Oasis, is also an intriguing story. Could you relate that for us?
He was working with Union Carbide. Union Carbide had this foaming technology that they had brought from Germany after World War II. Dr. Bakelite in Germany had invented this system. That's where Bakelite, the plastic Bakelite, came from. And it was an anomaly of the laboratory. It was a piece of foaming technology that had failed every utility test known to man. It was no good for acoustics. It was no good for insulation. It was no good for packaging. It wasn't good for anything. And Vernon was looking at it as a reservoir to store acid for batteries for Union Carbide. And it didn't do real well at that either. So he bought this technology from Union Carbide because they were done with it. They had flushed it out. And he said, I know I can find something to do with this. So he rented a garage in downtown Akron and started making this in the great big blocks. And at that time, the natural color was pink of this foam. And the story goes that he filled up the garage, and then he filled up the land behind the garage and on the side of the garage. And Mrs. Smithers came by one day and said, honey, the town is going to get after us if we don't start getting this stuff cleaned up. And by the way, have you come up with an idea yet as to what to do with it? And he said, not yet, but I'm working on it. And the story goes that he had given his wife a flower arrangement. And one evening, looking at that flower arrangement, he said, I know that the cells are open. If I could just get water to go into the cells of this foam, maybe florists could stick flowers in it and you could use it for that. He went down into his basement and he had a row of bottles of surfactants, soap-like materials, surface active agents that break down the surface tension on anything. And he reached up and he grabbed one of these bottles and he sprayed it on the foam and he put it into the water, and 12 hours later it had absorbed water. Voila, he stuck some flowers into it and they didn't die right away. And he said, Eureka, maybe this is going to work. So he took this foam to some florists. They advised him that pink wasn't the best color, even in floristry. So he made it green. Then went to the post office and said, what's the biggest piece, biggest container, biggest box that you all will accept? And they gave him length, girth, and all these dimensions. And he cut a piece of foam like that, took a ruler and scored it out 3 inches by 4 inches by 9 inches on the kitchen table. And that's the block that he made. So he started with what the post office would allow and then divided it up into equal segments. And that 3 by 4 by 9 has become a worldwide standard now for a brick of floral foam. The rest is sort of history. What was interesting, Ted was telling me that after he started making this product, that they worked for the next couple of years trying to replace that one surfactant that he had used, and all the others were phytotoxic to flowers. So had he gotten the bottle to the right or the bottle to the left, he'd have said, shucks, there's another great idea that didn't work. So by the luck of the draw, he picked the right surfactant to test. And the other story was that early on, he had 1 or 2 people working. In fact, he told the boys, he said, I'm going to really go after this. his sons, and keep your day jobs because I'm going to sell the going concern, which was a laboratory, and I'm going to concentrate full bore on this new Oasis product that I'm working on. And the kids thought that the old man had lost his mind because he was 65 years old when he did this, not a risk-adverse person. So he didn't buy, but he leased a piece of ground over in Kent from a person that he knew. And the person said, well, Vernon, don't worry about paying me. You just go get your product up and going. And when you can afford to pay me, well, then we'll talk about some rents. And that was kind of the way he got started in Kent, Ohio. But he started off there making this particular product. And today it's spread around the world. As I said earlier, 22 operating companies and about 1,000 employees across the globe making a living, taking care of florists.
Charlie, you have a background in horticulture. Do you have time to do any dabbling yourself? Can you talk about that?
You know, I'm not a gardener. I'm say I am a gardener. I'm not a golfer. But yeah, I dabble. I have a love of horticulture. My wife is also a grand gardener and herbalist. As you know, you two were in the Herb Society together. And so she and I share the passion for gardening, and we just have a hoot doing it. And we do all of our own work, and we do our own planting and our own maintenance. And to us, that's just fun. So, of course, I think people have time to do the things that people want to do.
And any other members of your family interested?
Oh, it's funny. I have a son, Ben, who evidently paid a lot more attention than you give children credit for, and he is a landscape contractor today. So I always thought having a son as a landscape contractor would be really great because you'd have all these great toys and tools. But I found that that's really not the case. It means that your tools are his tools and your equipment is out on a job somewhere. So he and I have learned to coexist with this sort of a thing. So, but we have a lot of fun. And my daughter is on the other end of the continuum. She's getting ready for her PhD, working on a PhD in philosophy in Duquesne. Never thought that she would be much of the gardener, but now that she has an apartment, all the green plants and wanting to grow this and that, so the horticultural disease spreadeth, I think.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Maybe just a comment about the area of horticulture, and I understand that this video, along with others, will talk to those that perhaps are some that are in the business and some that are not. As we see agriculture shifting here in this country, so few people are actively engaged in agriculture that feeds so many. The area that holds tremendous promise is urban agriculture, and this is horticulture. We see viticulture taking great strides, especially in the West. We see urban horticulture having a lot of different activities and branches to it. It goes far beyond the production of a flat of petunias. There's horrific strides being made in plant breeding. There's a university infrastructure like Ohio State that supports the trades. It's a fantastic opportunity for young people, and I would implore them to look at the opportunities that there are so many new opportunities. And when you interview Doug Callan with Davey Tree, and he explains what Davey is doing today versus what Davey did back when I worked with him, it's a totally different company with using totally new and different technologies. So it's an exciting time to be coming into this field, and tremendous opportunities. And the barriers to entry as an entrepreneur are still rather low by comparison to other things to do, and it is a unique opportunity.